I think this is my 9th CMG that I've presented at. It's always great to be back in the US. You can hear I'm not a native. Based over in a place called Taunton in the southwest of England, for the guys of you that know where that is. As Alex mentioned, I come from the old Metron background, which is now, as you can see, SyncSort. I've been part of SyncSort for about 18 months. SyncSort acquired Metron in the Athene product, which I'm sure some of you or many of you are familiar with from coming to CMG for many years. So we're part of SyncSort now, and the good thing for us is that capacity is still valued very highly within SyncSort. We're driving it forward. We are, investing in capacity management as our products and as our way forward. So it's always an honour to be able to be invited to speak at these events. As Alex also mentioned, I've been working in capacity management for quite a number of years now, and from a consultancy basis, working for a vendor, as you can tell that we are vendors and that we offer products. But this presentation this morning is to talk about capacity management in the digital and agile world, and what we really mean about that is think about how things are evolving or have evolved over time, and how things are evolving as we go forward into the future, and what role capacity management plays within that. And I know many of us here are involved in capacity and performance, so we know that things are changing within our own organisations and how we can adapt, and also convince people within organisations about the importance of capacity management still in a digital and agile world. And there was a good comment yesterday, I think it was in the chapter from Capital One Bank that someone mentioned about how can I convince people that we still need to do this testing in a cloud environment, and we all laughed because we thought, how ridiculous does that sound? But there's a perception, okay? There's a perception that cloud is the answer for everything. And that's, as we know, there's a lot of experienced IT guys, people in the room here, that we know that it's not the answer to everything, and it's just a different way of delivering IT resourcing to organizations that we've been used to in the past. So this kind of presentation talks about some of the basics. I won't spend too much time on that, but I will just cover the basics. I'm sure we all know, what they are. And then if I move on to the agenda so everyone can see what I'm going to cover in this presentation. So we're going to look at, a very brief look back at cloud, and specifically why I've put this slide up about cloud is about the as-a-service model. Okay, what is the as-a-service model? What does it give us? Then there's the 4 myths of capacity management. And again, it's about being able to, in this digital and agile world where things move very quickly, or are moving very quickly, and we've just had a really great keynote session this morning from Donovan from Microsoft about DevOps and the world that they live in, and how fast to market is key for them. And he gave that great example of the pit stop with the F1 car. But capacity is still as important as it ever was before, and I'll talk about why that is the case. So DevOps, Agile, capacity management is there, why it's important. How do we fit those things together? How do we do that? And what I would like, I'm happy for questions whenever you feel like raising them throughout the session, okay? If you feel like you want to wait to the end, that's great, but I'm happy to take questions as well. Not saying I know all the answers to your questions, but I'll certainly endeavour to try and answer some of them. Now with cloud, specifically public cloud, for example, is that you'll get a lot of great features that are being delivered by public cloud providers, one of which, of course, is auto-scaling. Okay, we can auto-scale. So how does that, again, impact on capacity management? Big question. Is capacity management needed? Well, I've kind of preempted that question by saying, well, of course it's needed, and we'll discuss why. Then there's things like challenges between migrating to the cloud. So if you've got on-prem solutions, applications that you want to migrate to the cloud, what are the challenges around being able to migrate to the cloud? And also some guidelines around and best practices around cloud planning. And finally, before the summary, just to talk about our kind of focus tends to change. Okay, And I'll explain a good quote from a customer of ours that talks about how they do their operations and what they use in the cloud, and about how cost impact has become very vital to them. And getting the right data, getting the right metrics to be able to use and report and plan proactively on that. And then we'll just have a quick summary. So that's what we're going to cover today. Any questions at this point? Okay, great. Let's move on. Now, you're probably going to be in a box if you don't know what the cloud is by now, right? Okay, everybody knows. I know you all know what the cloud is. But like I said before, the reason for putting this slide up is just to kind of talk about the as-a-service model. Okay, what does an as-a-service model give to us? Okay, so software as a service. Okay, we all use software as a service nowadays. Even if you're going to use Gmail or Hotmail or whatever it is, for your emails, that's a software as a service application. Okay, we all use it. We all embrace that day in, day out. Those systems are sat there in the cloud, or those applications are being hosted in the cloud somewhere and being delivered to us by the means over the internet. Okay, so the internet is fundamental for us on that. Then we have platform as a service. So we can start tapping into platforms available to us from cloud providers such as Amazon, Google, AWS, Azure, and Google, and all the others, where we can start building systems, and we can start being able to use them very, very quickly. And then you've got other services there. You've got your infrastructure as a service if you just want to build your own systems and use that effectively. But if you look along the bottom where there's kind of tier shapes, we've got on-demand self-service, we've got resource pooling, we've got broad network access, we've got rapid elasticity, and we've got other services available to us there. And the point about cloud and agility, is the elasticity and the ability to provide things very quickly. Okay, that we can spin things up very quickly, and we can spin them down, and we can use them. But then the model changes in terms of how we are charged for that. Okay, so we go into what's known as utility computing. Just like you buy utilities, you pay for your water, your gas, your electric, right? And you get a bill at the end of every month, and you pay for that, for what you use. And it's the same for the cloud. So the as-a-service model is moving from a CapEx to an OpEx model in terms of organizations, and how we use those resources and how we get charged for them. So that utility and charging is really important. And just very quickly, before I move on to the next slide, is the cloud types. We know that we can have internal clouds, okay, which is the elasticity of virtualization that provides that to us. We have the external clouds, as I just mentioned, the Amazons and the Googles of the world, and the Microsofts. And then we have hybrid cloud. Now, in my experience, hybrid cloud models are the ones that are being adopted the most, because there are elements within an organization that cannot move to the cloud in terms of applications. So if you think about mainframes, okay, and the applications that run on mainframes, and the fast transaction performance that are needed at the mainframes, that's still critical to a lot of organizations. But there are other applications, whether it's middle tier or middleware, or whether it's web-based stuff, can move to the cloud. So we have this hybrid model that we operate in. And most organizations have that hybrid model in place now, or at least moving to that, if not have it in place now. I'm sure many of your organizations do. So essentially, that's kind of setting the scene in terms of what we're dealing with. But the DevOps and the agile world that we are moving in now takes advantage of that elastic computing and that utility computing. The 4 myths of capacity management. We don't need it for the cloud. Why do we need it? We can just demand as much capacity as we like, right? It was said yesterday in that presentation. Why do we need to do capacity management? We could just spin up as many things as we want, okay? And we can just use as much as we want, and when we don't need it, we can turn it off. Yeah? Right?
They actually are finite, right? It's a certain amount of resources.
Yeah, and this was mentioned, again, the gentleman mentioned it yesterday in his presentation, is if you think of I don't know what the number is now, but I remember reading a stat about Amazon AWS, and they had over 500,000 blade servers in their data centers running Zen, you know the Zen hypervisor? Okay, to support AWS, spinning up virtual machines, and they use OpenStack to do that. So you're right, these things have got to run somewhere, right?
And then on the peak day, right, which is the most interesting, like Black Friday, what happens if everyone asks for everything at the same time?
Good point. Yeah, exactly. Demand. So I think a question was or a statement was made yesterday about, are the cloud providers doing capacity planning on their own systems? Because they should be.
Do they auto-scale?
It's a good question. Yeah. Adding more and more systems, adding more and more capacity to provide the demand, the on-demand capabilities of the public cloud for people to use. It's a good point. Because resources are finite. Okay, they are finite. We know that. We worked in capacity long enough to know at some point these things are going to degrade. Okay? What we're trying to do is pinpoint when that's going to degrade before it happens. Okay? That's our job as capacity planners, is to work out when these things are going to degrade before it happens so that we can do something to avoid that impact on services. So, on demand, this perception of being on demand, that we can demand whatever resources we want whenever we like, and we just have to pay for it, okay? So it's like saying, I said about utility computing, so if you want to put enough electrical appliances in your home and run them 24/7, they're going to deliver that electricity to you. But when you get your bill, right, that lands on your mat, you're going to pay for it. And it's no different from using cloud resources within an organization about how much you're using and how you're going to keep control of your costs, okay? And that's where things are starting to move towards. So it just says clouds are elastic, we know that. There's the dynamic, they're automatic, they've got prevention in them as well. We're talking about a bit later about autoscaling. Costs are, I say one of the myths is that clouds are elastic, but you just made the good point about there is finite resources there, okay? So there are some limitations. And actually, excuse me. Didn't want to do that. I'll move that out of the way. You've heard of cloud outages, right? Azure had a big one in Europe not that long ago, where people couldn't get access to their systems, their applications, because Microsoft Azure went down. It had a big outage in data centers. So you're always on that limit of being, what do we put into the cloud? What do we not have control over? You're going to get the ability of not being able to access that at some point. So there's always that kind of element to it. Costs are always lower when using the cloud is another myth. Okay, we just explained about, if you think about things like fixed assets, depreciation, data center, operations, okay? So a lot of CIOs, CTOs now they have a cloud-first policy, right? Everything's got to go into the cloud. Cloud-first policy. If we're going to run this, it's got to go into the cloud. Because this perception that the cloud is cheaper than having on-premise. That's not always the case, okay? You need to be able to do that planning, right, that work, to be able to identify, what is it costing us to run this internally? What is it going to cost us to run it in the cloud? Okay, and taking all those things into consideration. And, capacity management is fundamentally part of that solution of being able to plan effectively of what you need in the cloud. Because what you end up doing is you end up over-provisioning. Everyone ends up over-provisioning because they haven't done the correct planning to know what they need within the cloud. Okay, so therefore you over-provision, you'll pay more per hour running those systems in the cloud than you would need to, right? To think that you're going to have this extra capacity to meet your peaks. Okay, so there's always that myth as well. Architecture and planning become less important. So this we can eat everything. We can have as much as we want. We can fire and forget. All of that, is in this mindset of being able to use cloud resources. Okay. You've heard about dedicated hosts within Amazon AWS, for example. You can buy dedicated hosts to run your systems on. They are significantly more expensive than using a shared or multi-tenant model. Okay. So therefore, unless you want to go dedicated and kind of ring fence what you're going to use, you're going to want to try and save costs by using this multi-tenant approach. Okay, but then you're going to get noisy neighbors, right? Because other people are going to be using those systems. So you've always got to think about, there's some elements under your control and there's some elements that are not under your control. Okay, so you've got to factor that in. But again, it comes back to where capacity management can come into play is, what your systems are using, what your peak times are, what your forecasts are in terms of your planning, in terms of your business demand, what is going to be needed within the cloud, what's going to be acceptable, and think about how much that's going to cost you over time. So DevOps, Agile, and capacity management. So you can see the DevOps cycle. And Donovan kind of gave a brilliant, as I said, presentation this morning about this faster market DevOps and capabilities. So what are the benefits? Okay, benefits of capacity management within a DevOps and an Agile environment. Well, our capacity management process is underpinned by what we call pliable IT infrastructure. And what we mean by pliable is it's elastic. It's, we can select what we want. We can choose what we need. Okay? Digital service relationships. So if you think about the services that your organizations are providing to their customers and about how we can react to customers' demands and that how we can, adjust the way capacity management is configured within an agile environment, how we can change those relationships with our customers, how we can underpin that very faster market organization by fitting into this DevOps cycle here. We got this quick to market approach. That's what people want to see. That's what they want to do. But how do we avoid slow and onerous processes? Do you think capacity management as a process is seen as a slow and onerous process? Some people do, right? Some people see it as something. How can these two things work together? You want to deliver something very fast. You want to spin stuff up very quickly. How does a capacity management process fit into that cycle effectively so that you can make sure that you're not going to be impacted? So, as it says, where does capacity management fit into an elastic environment? I'm really interested to hear your thoughts on that. I mean, as I said, it's an open discussion. It's kind of, where do you think we fit within this DevOps cycle? Yeah.
After Donovan's presentation, I asked him where people think capacity goes with, and he suggested to get involved in the planning so that they do plans for this.
Yeah.
So try to get involved early, which is kind of the same thing as it probably always has.
Absolutely. Yeah. My personal opinion is all of these things. Every single one of them. You should be involved in capacity. Every single one of these items, capacity management should be involved. Okay? From the build stage, the deploy stage, the testing stage, and the release stage. Every single element should be monitored, and you do your retrospective, and that's that cyclical process of going around. We used to, in ITIL terms, used to call it monitoring, analysis, tuning, and implementation. Right? And you used to go and you used to follow it around. Why is this any different? So let's move on to talking about the impact of auto-scaling. All right, so public cloud features, okay, you've got your Amazon or your Microsoft or your Google, whoever your public cloud providers, or even internal cloud in some respects in terms of virtualization that you're using. We can scale up and we can scale down numbers of instances. And you can see that on that picture, yeah. As the demand rises, we can scale things up. We can set high watermarks per instance. We can actually, be able to set, it needs to, go no higher than this, and then spin things down. So everyone thinks, great, look how elastic and look how great that is, and we can save costs by doing that way because we can spin things up, spin things down as demand increases and everything else. Okay, fine. What do you know what to set? First question. How do we know what are high watermarks for this auto-scaling we need to set in the public cloud? Whose job is that to do that? Capacity management? Yeah? Have you ever over or under provisioned? Of course you have. Everybody does it, right? But whose job, again, is to help, find that sweet spot, that understanding of where we think our peaks are, what the business demand is, bringing that together, and what we think we need to avoid being impacted. Capacity management. Okay. So I know sometimes I feel I'm preaching, to the converted in that respect, but I'm just trying to get across that when you get these questions that you hear from people in your organization as, why do we need this stuff? Why do we need to do this? It's just easy. It's just cloud. We can spin stuff up, spin it down. We don't need this stuff, right? Yes, you do. Okay? It's an assurance process that is alongside the agile and the DevOps that can still be very fast to market. We have to adopt the way we do capacity management for an agile world, okay, the DevOps world. But it's still the same thing. We still are proactively avoiding impacts to service that affect our customers and affect our business, okay? And that's why we do this. So it's still important. So planning for increases, like it says, or how do you model these things that spin up and spin down very, very quickly? Okay, how do you model that? How do you actually, get that information that you can actually predict what's going to happen when you can spin stuff and spin things down very quickly? But the core competency of capacity management is still there. You still need to, what is the cloud? Someone said this yesterday. What is the cloud? It's just someone hosting it somewhere else for you. It's not on your environment. It's public cloud, it's some other data center. But it's still CPU, memory, disk storage, I/O. It's still computer resources. They're still finite. They've still got to be planned effectively, and that's where capacity management comes in. Okay. Any questions on that? On auto-scaling? Because I'm trying to get across the perception is all these features that public cloud provide are kind of, great in terms of their perception, how we can do stuff very quickly. But in reality, these things still need to be planned effectively. So, this leads on to looking at, is capacity management still needed? Right? Well, hopefully everyone overwhelmingly in the organization, in this room, being at CMG, says, of course we need capacity management. Stable IT services still need to be provided. We're still looking at optimizing and providing those cost savings as mentioned. We still need SLAs, or SLAs are still in place within organizations. Response times. What's the impact to customers? What happens if the SLAs are breached? Is there a financial impact to us? All of that still needs to be maintained. That's where capacity comes in. So if we're migrating from the cloud, to the cloud, I say, we've got some challenges. We know that hybrid and public cloud adoption is increasing. Okay, everyone's in agreement with that. Elasticity suits some but not all applications, so we've mentioned that. And there's still some, most organizations in the world will have some kind of mainframe of some kind in them, especially if you're around financial services, high-end transactions, okay? So they're seen as legacy systems, right? But they're still important to the organization. So that hybrid kind of view is what's being adopted. So those critical applications, as the organization sees them, the ones that make the money for them, okay, the ones that are pretty much, they don't want to relinquish control. They don't feel like they want to put them into a public cloud. Or maybe they can't run in a public cloud, so they keep them on-premise. So some questions here then. What factors help you decide what is a suitable candidate for moving into the cloud? What do we think, in terms of, what we can put in the cloud as applications? Web layer front end kind of applications, mobile apps, all of that kind of thing are more suitable. Elastic, are they written in an elastic way that you can spin things up and spin things down and have that on-demand capacity? So how can you conclude that moving to cloud is the best option? How do we go about that? Or what region do you choose? Do you factor in things like GDPR? I mean, everyone's been affected by GDPR in some form or another recently, right? When they changed the rules. The Patriot Act. I know I'm in America, it's the Patriot Act, and forgive me if I get this wrong, but I understand that the Patriot Act, if you're hosting data in any US data center, okay, the US government can have access to that data through the Patriot Act. And that's in complete confliction to the GDPR, or what we used to call the Data Protection Act in Europe. So there was this big conflict of storing stuff. Now, of course, in public cloud world, you can store anything where you like, in European data centers or US data centers or wherever it is. So where do you choose? You just choose on cost, or do you choose on compliance? So things you have to think about. And then what about future growth? What about the business demand? What's going to happen in the future? What's the business going to do? How's it going to affect our services? What do we need to plan for? What systems do we need in the cloud? How do we find that sweet spot? How do we not over-provision or under-provision so that we could get impacted? There's a number of questions to think about when we're migrating to the cloud from an on-prem. Just some very quick guidelines on cloud capacity planning. So I've put a couple of, hopefully you can see them okay, but there's a couple of exclusions from Amazon and from Google here, all right, about SLAs. Because you think about it, if it goes outside your organization, it's now become outside of your control. You're now going into the cloud. Okay, so of course, they're not stupid. They're going to put SLA exclusions in to protect themselves, right? In terms of response times, in terms of it goes out, you're using our systems, it's going to come back to you. So there are some exclusions there. You'll get these in the presentation slides. So planning and control, what do we do before we go into the cloud, and what do we do post-cloud? So what do we need now in the cloud? As I said before, what systems do we need? What's the business demand? What we're going to need in the future? So don't just do it for now, we do it for the future. Okay, what we think we're going to need. And then what happens when you go into the cloud? That cyclical process of monitoring, analysis, tuning, implementation is still relevant. We still need to get the cloud data. And go back to your point about instrumentation and the cost of instrumentation, because it can be expensive, is about how do we get that data? And how can we use that data effectively? Okay? And everyone's restricted by costs, budget. But without that visibility, I think you made the point about there are savings that could be made there if we do that stuff early enough, even if we have to spend up front to do that, right? So there are some, there's some benefits that have got to be explained to the upper management about why we're doing this and what savings we're going to make further down the line. But anyway, as it says, the guidelines for cloud planning there, there's some SLA exclusions you have to think about, and there are some credits that you can get back from the cloud provider if your SLAs are impacted. Okay, like Google give you credits. Is that the same as if your SLA is breached and you've been hit by a financial penalty? Is that the same as what you're getting back from Google or Amazon? I think not, maybe. So we have to, there's lots of things to be aware of there. I mentioned cost, and I mentioned that example from a customer who's very elastic and using Kubernetes, using AWS, spinning stacks up, spinning them down. Their biggest event of the entire year, their peak for planning, is the Grand National. You've heard of the Grand National in the UK, the horse race? Hopefully most of you have. It's one of the biggest horse races in the world. Okay, that's their peak. They know that online gambling is going to hit its peak at that point. So they know they can plan effectively for the number of stacks that they can spin up to support that. Now, each year, more and more people going online gambling. Okay, they get more sign-ups for accounts, and they do that. So they put into their planning, about where they think these additional stacks are going to spin up. But if they need that on-demand capacity, they can spin that up very quickly, right? But they've got to keep a control of their costs. Comes back to costs. So again, pricing parameters. What zone we're in, what storage options we're using, what tenancy are we going to use? Is it shared? Is it dedicated? Are we having an all-you-can-eat kind of platform as a service from the cloud? So is it going to spin up a database? What type of operating system? All have different cloud pricing options. All right, all charge you differently. Linux is cheaper than Windows, for example. If you're running a SQL Server database, that's going to cost, and everything else. So there's lots of different pricing options. And cloud providers give you discounts, and then there's the location options. It's cheaper in North America than it is in, say, Frankfurt in Europe, and so on and so forth. So you've got geographical things that you have to factor in terms of your costs. And then there's the metrics. So what metrics can we get from the cloud providers? Instrumentation, right? What can we get in to look at, to combine with the cost metrics and see where the plan, see what we need to plan and how much it's going to cost us. So the focus now becomes from, okay, we can use the resource metrics to help us, okay? But actually, we want to start planning cost. We want to forecast cost. The business wants to know cost. What's it going to cost us to run this in the cloud? So that becomes really important, is to get that information and bring that together, correlate it, and forecast. Then you're in a much stronger position for elastic computing and cloud. Just a quick kind of, have you all heard of a CMIS? Or what a CMIS is? Is that a yes? Did I hear a yes? All right, I'll explain. It's an acronym for Capacity Management Information System. Okay, you may have heard of that. But essentially what it is being able to centralize your capacity data, accessible centrally. Okay, that's being able to integrate business, service, and component level data together to produce your reports and plans. Okay, and if you get cloud metrics, cloud cost information, resource information, you can bring in business data, APM data, storage data, whatever it is. Then you can combine that together and plan effectively. And that's available with a capacity management information system to provide that centralized view of your data. Because at the moment, some of you may be going from one database to another database, trying to stitch everything together, because you've got repositories all across your organization. That's a lot of effort. It's a lot of maintenance, and it's going to take a lot of time. And if you count up the amount of hours that you spend doing that and try and put a cost to that, it's probably going to outweigh what a capacity management information system can provide to you. So just to summarize, a couple of minutes left. Cloud provides instant access to pliable IT infrastructure. Okay, we can spin stuff up, provision very quickly. We can get that up and running, and we can start using that effectively. If your applications are elastic, we can spin stacks up and we can spin them down. There's on-demand capacity available to us. That underpins the DevOps and the agile process. Okay, we've seen that build, test, deploy, and cycle of DevOps, and that's capable. We're capable. It says it underpins that from an agile perspective, because we can change, and we can change very quickly. Capacity management needs to adapt and is adapting to be able to still provide that service assurance without being that bottleneck to slow things down. Okay, and we are changing the way we do that deployment and adoption with capacity management. Public cloud performance cannot always be guaranteed. Okay, you saw those SLA exclusions. You think about, yes, these resources are to you. You're in a shared multi-tenant model, unless you dedicate, which is going to cost you more money, so it always cannot be guaranteed. But the last point on the slide is, and I've said this all through the presentation, is capacity management is as important now as it's ever been. Okay, and you mentioned about that higher level kind of expectation, And we heard some examples yesterday about how people are thinking about, oh, well, we don't need this. It's still as important as ever. And it's up to us to prove that within our organizations of how important capacity management is in a hybrid cloud model, elastic model, and also a utility computing model. And that's it. Any questions? Okay, thanks.